But I do want to move on. We've got 3 more hands up, and then we're going to have to cut it off, and we'll give you a little break.
And we also have, Jean, we also had 2 other people, Brendan and Gail, also had questions. They didn't have their hands up, but.
Okay, so if we can keep them short. Ron, you had one more question. If you could just let's make sure we keep it brief and brief answers so we can get through everything.
Sure, a brief question and maybe a brief answer too, I think. My question came up when Andre was speaking, that actually might apply to Chris and Scott as well. But you were talking about a number of different sites that you have, and some large, some small. Do you have physical presence on site at each of these locations, or are you remote when you work with these different organizations and cities?
Sorry, I missed, who is that question for? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Sure, I'll start off with Andre as the first question, but it might apply to a couple of others. The question is, are your staff on site, or are you remote when you work with these different organizations, since you have such a large number throughout the international community?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a bit of a mix. We have 2 main ways of partnering. We can either just license our technology to an agency that wants to use its own vehicles and drivers, and we create the app for them and kind of do all of that, or we can operate the full operations, full turnkey service on their behalf. So in a situation where we're doing more of the turnkey service, we're more likely to have staff on the ground on a more permanent basis. Even when we're licensing our technology, we're very often on the ground, at least for some period of time, and very regularly in touch with them, even if we don't have somebody based in the actual location, full time. But we have full-time staff at VIA who are based throughout the world.
Yeah, and I can answer on MoveIt's behalf. So yeah, we're truly global. So we're based just outside of Tel Aviv, but we have presence pretty much on almost every continent. So yeah, we've got quite a presence here in the US and growing. We've got folks in Europe, Central America, South America, and similar to Andre, I mean, we're not an operator like for instance, VIA has an operations component. We're just strictly a software as a service provider, so we can do a lot of our work remote, but certainly we do have presence in all the major regions across the world.
Mm-hmm.
And for IMO, we're all pretty much remote. We have different partners and operators throughout Europe and globally, but it's pretty much a typical remote operation as well as a software as a service business model. So,
okay. Thank you.
Charlene, I think, is next in line.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So my question is to all 3 of you, Andre, Scott, and Chris, is about how closely you are talking in terms of coming out of this pandemic and thinking into the future. How closely you are in close contact with the industry manufacturers, and also who may be helping or thinking redesigning of vehicles in order to maintain those social distancing type of thing. So are we connected or disconnected between what manufacturers can do for us to really bring back public transit into the forefront pre-COVID scenario, right now looking at 12 months or even lesser into consideration? Is that our word is connected or disconnected from your perspective?
Maybe I'll be the first to try to respond to this. Certainly from a manufacturer, maybe if we're going to say automotive OEM perspective, IMO works indirectly or directly with several different OEMs here in Europe and Asia. And the conversations are, one, certainly around different vehicle types and sizes related to electric mobility as well as autonomy and the different use cases that can be introduced into the environment for post-COVID response, as well as last mile solutions that can complement public transit. So there's different, I would say, schemes and pilots that are certainly being explored right now with us as either partners or project leads on. But I think, as we've seen, to be frank, in the mobility as a service ecosystem, a lot of the automotive companies have taken quite a hit, specifically in this domain, and there's been quite a shift. The shift started happening even before COVID-19, as we saw many of the different car share providers. I'm not going to name any names, but many of the OEMs started exiting the markets. Starting in North America, that acceleration happened, and now here in Europe. So we see quite a shakeup and a change in the key stakeholders of who is kind of driving the discussions between PTAs and mobility providers in terms of delivering mass solutions, but also seeing how OEMs are kind of rethinking the case model, connected, autonomous, shared electrification. And how does mass fit into that? How does that fit into their supply chains, their dealer networks, everything? So this started probably in mid to late 2019, and man, when COVID hit, you know, a lot of them are just dropping off like flies now. So again, I don't want to name names, but in the OEM perspective, our conversations have certainly changed. Some are meaningful, but others are a bit less material than before. So I think we're seeing different, I would say, partnerships and discussions with manufacturers in a different level. And I think after we kind of move through the crisis, there's going to be different stakeholders at the table than there were in 2018, 2019. So it's a very different landscape. I know that didn't answer your question, but from the manufacturer and OEM perspective, it's not as material now as it was a year or two ago. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, thanks. And just jump in quickly, echo Scott. Yeah, we're seeing much of the same, obviously, with our acquisition by Intel. Obviously, we work closely with Mobileye. So again, a lot of the work we're doing, is around, again, the autonomy, less around, obviously design of vehicles and things such as that. But we are seeing a lot of conversations around, it's not so much the OEMs, but more so around the on-vehicle equipment and the ability to communicate some of that data in as real time as possible to riders. So essentially, you can imagine like automated passenger count data and things such as that, so that obviously that information can be shared so that people can make decisions that they feel comfortable with in terms of, should I get on this bus, should I not, so on and so forth.
Can we move to Brendan's question, then Gail, then Prachi, and then we can go on. We can take a break after that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Susan raised sort of the big picture challenges. I wanted to ask the panel about a more mundane, practical challenge that I see in their opinion. Everybody agrees we need more integration between fixed route transit, DRT, micromobility, and we've made great progress in developing customer-facing apps for trip planning, real-time information, which is derived from internal systems, integrated fare payment. But from an operational control point of view, the major suppliers, the systems that are provided for fixed route and for DRT internally within transit agencies are totally separate and managed separately. And micromobility ones are even one step further removed. Just any thoughts about how we're going to move off the needle to get more integration of the actual operations control, because there's, theoretical schedules never really happen properly.
Yeah, I think this is, oh, sorry. Sorry, someone else might want to go first, and then I'll jump in.
Chris or Scott?
I'll probably defer to Chris on that. Yeah, I don't think I have much to add.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, these are, Brendan, these are certainly, challenges that, we're facing as well. How to make it so that obviously the ecosystem acts as, in the most optimal way possible, and agree that a lot of these disparate, systems that these transit agencies have, can be challenging at times to integrate and mesh with the ecosystem that they're trying to build around. So it's certainly something I think probably everybody, I'm not necessarily speaking for Scott and Andre, but it's certainly a challenge that we deal with as these transit agencies have invested very heavily in the technology that they have, for instance, for fixed route. So again, it's kind of part of the ecosystem that you need to play around with as you look to evolve around it. So it's I think you've hit the nail on the head on something that certainly when you look to optimize the ecosystem, what it should look like. How do you make that more adaptable, not just during COVID, but also during certain days of the week where it may make more sense to provide more flexible service during the weekend and more fixed route service during the week.
Because you want to have seamless transfers between the two. And there was lots of discussion about real-time occupancy monitoring with reservation systems.
Yep.
It's really hard to imagine how these are going to work seamlessly.
Yeah, I would. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think you're raising like governance issues is like just a huge topic, right? Not just what you're describing, but even governance between like transit agencies versus the DOTs versus other agencies. I think, I think in our experience, the way you try to overcome those very real issues is you need like the very top of the transit, the very top of leadership to buy into what you're doing and kind of lead that charge internally but I'm not saying it's not without challenges, but it sort of takes, the head of the agency or someone similar level kind of deciding this is a priority and they're gonna make it happen. But we have had, I can't talk about it sort of on this public chat yet, but like we have transit agencies that want to do the capacity planning stuff that we have, that we've talked to and even signed a contract with. So yeah, it can happen. And also just one very quick thing, Marlene raised something in the chat, which I just wanted to quickly mention on the House bill. I think because this group is sort of focused on emerging modes and innovation, I do think the House bill is actually like not very good on the innovation front and sort of, which I agree with Susan is going to be critically important to the survival of transit and getting people out of private occupancy. But I think there's a lot of good stuff sort of overall on the public transit front and kind of at least shifting a little bit of our focus on the goals at hand. So I think there's some good things to build on, but I definitely don't think it's like there on some of the key things that we needed to get there on.
Thank you.
Gail, you had a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so this question is more towards the micromobility side, but it also speaks about connecting fixed route transit, in this case maybe commuter rail, to some of the smaller but very active small cities and downtowns that have access to commercial lines like the Montclairs and Summits. I'm from New Jersey, GY Associates. I'm retired from NJDOTs, just as I throw that out there. So I've been talking to some people locally about what we can do to improve some of the economies in these downtowns where many of the retail businesses are suffering, but have opportunities for more business and pickups. And is there a role, or do any of the micromobility or other providers see some way to make some connections to providing additional service to some of those smaller city downtowns that would both support the provision of connecting to these fixed rail services? Like Montclair has 3 or 4 different train stations on the New Jersey Transit lines, for example. There's Summit, there's Morristown, there's a number of Princeton, there's a number of small towns in New Jersey of middle size that probably have some opportunities. So I guess the question is really asking, is there a role for the micromobility providers to sort of help bridge the gap between the economic downturn and maybe resurgence of small retail and providing trip making to people who don't want to, and keeping them out of their cars as a way to kind of be a win-win for both transportation and the economy?
I'll probably try to jump in there, but was your question, did you say, is there a law in place, or is it just more, is there an initiative? Because
I'm asking if there's an opportunity.
Oh, an opportunity, yeah, okay. So there's certainly opportunities.
There's opportunity for what might be possible.
Okay, yeah, there's been much written about this recently, and it's kind of rethinking the role of micromobility during and post-COVID. So it's more of kind of a public asset, right? So it's more of a mode that is akin to docked bike share, so city-run bike schemes, and thinking of an offer to local citizens in specific economic zones or districts that are underserved to boost, shall we say, economic development and other desired outcomes, whether that be through subsidies, joint ventures, or partnerships. Not in the, I don't want to say carrot and stick, more the carrot approach, where operators are incentivized or right-sized so that they will basically partner in the ecosystem with local and regional municipalities to provide access and utilization to their rolling stock or their fleet to basically align with these different policy initiatives. So I would say that in looking at micromobility less as a completely privatized, commercialized, short-term startup venture, moving past the detritus of the COVID landscape and all of the well-known micromobility operators with scooters left strewn on all of our sidewalks, to something that is a bit more localized, sustainable, maybe profitable, as well as supported in a truly collaborative manner between the public and private sectors, is something that could potentially demonstrate opportunities for these specific use cases. So I'm seeing some interesting promise. Some of the operators here in Europe, such as Tier and Voy, takes a great approach to pursuing partnerships with local and regional municipalities in Germany and Sweden. And we're starting to see some operators in the US, such as Spin and others, taking much more of this, shall we say, proactive approach. So we've learned a lot of hard lessons in the last 2 years in micromobility. And now, during and post-COVID, is the opportunity to get it right. And how do we get it right? We look at it as more of a public asset for the Commonwealth, for the common good, versus just a really short-term startup venture. I mean, that's my 2 cents on the topic.
Is that Scott speaking? Because I can't see you.
This is Scott. Yeah, here, sorry, did I not share myself?
No, I just don't know how to work all this stuff. You're not okay, there you are.
I wasn't sharing my screen. Sorry.
Okay. Because you were, I could not see you. I would be happy to continue this conversation with you offline.
If you have
because I think that what you're talking about is more of the European mass model of looking at mass as a public asset, where in this country, in the United States, it's really been viewed more as the private sector.
I know, but even in the United States, though, like docked bike share and certain bike share schemes have still been part of the public domain, though. So while it is a bit more something that's seen in Europe, specific to that mode of shared mobility, there's an opportunity for e-scooters and others to try and replicate that approach.
Right. And there are a couple of programs that have been successful in New Jersey. One is in Asbury Park, for example. It's probably not as active this summer as it was in previous summers.
Sure.
But they have a very good docked scooter program, as well as a bike share that's been very successful. I've been on a couple of presentations where the planner, Mike, a friend of mine, has made some really good presentations and tie that to connections to fixed route service, for example, the NJ Transit trains that go down.
Last mile connection. That's perfect. And it's run by the city of Asbury Park?
The program is, yes.
That's exactly what you're speaking to. That's excellent.
We're kind of running low on time.
Yeah.
So let's have one more question. Prachi, you had your hand up for a while, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah, thanks everyone for speaking. My question is very simple. With transit agencies facing trouble, are we going to see a privatization of their services? And I think from your perspective, you could answer if you're seeing more and more interest for your services as well. So that might be an indicator that we are moving towards privatization. So that's my question.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's tough. I haven't personally seen sort of some movement towards privatization in the way that we think about it overseas. I do think you know, I think this is already happening pre-COVID. We see increasing interest in sort of partnering with the private sector and kind of recognizing the advantages and sort of shortcomings of what the public agency has and sort of what the private sector can bring to the table, and sort of a lot of grappling with like what's the best way to partner with the private sector. So I think we will see like more and more of that partnership stuff. Yeah, I haven't yet sort of seen like any indication that we're moving to like a real privatization model like we've seen overseas, but I'd actually be curious what other people have. That's just an anecdotal thing for me.
Yeah, and I'll add, we've seen very much the same thing here in the U.S. It seems like, you know, people are dipping their toes into it, right, and testing it out and see how they can, you know, the private sector can be an ancillary part of the ecosystem, right? So I'm very much seeing things the same way here. So I think it's a bit too early to tell, you know, if we're heading towards privatization or not.
I'm just going to jump in real quick. I think it's an interesting question because as a state DOT, I've been asking the opposite. Does the state need to take a more active role in some of these? And, you know, in Michigan, I'm kind of, we're looking at doing a white label MOS app for our whole state because I feel it's something that could have helped with communication and with planning and response statewide. And many of our agencies simply can't afford to or don't have the bandwidth to take on a project like that. And so, you know, I think it might be a role of the state. We're looking into that to say we'll offer a base level of like a MOS app, and people can build on that with what makes sense for their areas. But we've got to get it started and we've got to jump start it. And so much of this stuff, I think there's interest from the private sector at the beginning, but then they realize it may not be profitable and they can't keep going. So we really need to imagine, just as public transit's reimagining themselves and private companies are reimagining what they should do, state government, at least in our state, under me, is reimagining what our role should be. So it's an interesting time, and I agree. It's who knows which way it'll go. So
yeah, and I think there are other states that feel exactly the way you do about it.
Yeah.
And again, it's all about having to be a lot more flexible than we ever did before. Yeah. So I'm gonna cut off. I hate cutting off questions, but why don't we all take a 10-minute break? So for those of us on the East Coast, it's sort of lunchtime. I realize that doesn't work with everybody else on the phone, especially the folks on the West Coast. But why don't we take a 10-minute break and come back at about 5 minutes of the hour, and then we'll go to our next presentation session.
And just a reminder to people to just be cognizant if you've got your microphone on, also to be cognizant whether you have your camera on, because sometimes we see things we don't necessarily need to see. So you might want to make sure you know whether or not your camera is on or off. So we will see you all back here in 10 minutes. Thank you so much to the speakers, Chris, Scott, Andre. Really great information and great conversation. Appreciate everyone's participation as well. So we'll see you in 10 minutes.
All right.
Thank you, Jean, Carol, and Prachi. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.